With current video games giving us sprawling world maps, narrative-heavy stories, real-time online multiplayer, and vibrant, expansive experiences, there are some genres of video games that don't get as much love and attention anymore, at least not by the big-name developers. Yet games today owe much of their existence to a genre that has lasted since the advent of the medium, platforming games. They might not be as expansive or as immense as games that get the hype today, but there is still an element of old school fun to be had. Sometimes you just want to play a game that plays out over many levels, with each one getting progressively harder. How are platformers still relevant today, and what can they still do for video games as a whole? We'll give you our thoughts right here on Downloadable Content. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and with me we have Ronnie.
Hi!
And only Ronnie.
Hi!
Only Ronnie. It's another short panel episode.
You could say you have Ron, and Ronnie, and you could still have had three people with the people you have on this.
Yeah. But Ron is not present. It's just Ronnie, so only one half of the two-pronged Ronnie attack. So
We are going to be talking about one of my two favorite types of video games, the first being RPGs, but the second being platformers.
yes, platforming games, and this is kind of an expansion of what we did last year when we gave the spotlight to fighting games, talking about how fighting games, also do not get love and attention anymore.
I think a lot of it is, with newer games, the other genres allow you to get story involved, and that's very important and a lot to attract a lot of people nowadays. And platforming games, with exceptions, generally don't have much in the way of plot.
Right. So, before we get too heavily invested into this discussion, let me just get the usual plugs out of the way. That downloadable content can be found on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. You can get a hold of us through a variety of different ways. Facebook.com/DLContent, at Twitter at DLContent, Tumblr at DLCpodcast.tumblr.com.
That guy in the trench coat on the side of the road, he'll give you CDs of downloadable content.
He will, yes. You can also email us, dlcontent1@gmail.com. So
We will soon be dropping CDs of downloadable content into war-torn areas to help promote peace.
yes, because
That's little known DLC specs.
Yes, well, we promote peace. We do not advocate violence unless it's on screen. So,
Well, yes. So let's move on to that.
there's an open season on anything. So, yes, platforming games is our discussion today, and both of us are old enough to.
This is what we grew up on.
Yeah, we remember the heyday of platforming games. In their earlys and it's the 80s and 90s were the big heyday of not just fighting games, for platforming as well. So
Here's something that's always kind of got me about this. So you probably started the same time as I did, and I'm going to go off platforming for about 10 seconds, but I'll bring it back. With RPGs, you probably started with like the old Final Fantasies, right? The old school ones.
my real first leap into RPGs probably was around the first gen Pokemon.
Okay.
Because it was right around that time where I also picked up Final Fantasy VII.
Okay. Great way to get involved. I'll say from my experience then. Like, I started with like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, like the originals, Dragon Warrior at that point. But And then I look at RPGs now, and while they don't get as much attention as they used to, I mean, when you look at them, there's some really good ones now, and they're gorgeous, they look great, they get a lot of attention. And then you look at platformers, and platformers back then were amazing, and then you look now, and, like, you can't find them. Like, you have to look hard. And there's good ones now, don't get me wrong, because we'll talk about some of the good new ones, but, like, they don't have the attention they used to. Except for Mario, and that's because he's more of a brand than a game.
Yes, I mean,
and that's no offense to Mario, because there's great Mario games, but if they took any one of the current Mario games and rebranded it as a different character, do you think it would have done anywhere near as well?
Well, that's for history to decide.
Point taken.
Since we don't know, I mean. So, video games as a medium have been around for a little over 40 years at this point. So, and in those 40 years, we've had a lot of evolution just in the medium alone. I mean, for some historical background, and also if any of you out there listening to this are little ones who have no idea what we're talking about, we should probably give them a bit of an idea of what a platforming game actually is.
Have any of you played the new Super Mario Brothers? That's a new version of old platforming games. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so basically any game that is essentially you go through a game and you progress usually pretty linearly, level by level, with occasional bosses thrown in until, you get to the end boss and you beat the game. It's not like an RPG where it's just continual play.
Now, unlike some ones, platforming is also defined by having the aforementionedly named platforms that you jump up and off of, adding a vertical segment to the game.
And, of course, if you want the text definition, courtesy of Wikipedia, a platform game is a video game which involves guiding an avatar to jump between suspended platforms, over obstacles, or both to advance the game.
Now, I give even our younger listeners more credit than that. I'm pretty sure they all actually know what a platform game is, but, we have to do our part in the education.
Yes, because, I mean, here we are, us old people, Now
it's time to talk about the old school ones that paved the way.
Yeah, so we start what is widely considered to be the first true platforming game. You'd have to go back to 1981, involving an ape and a plumber.
Yes.
You'd have to go back to the original Donkey Kong. That is widely considered to be the first one.
And one of the things that brought gaming back.
Well, 1981. This was before the big E.T. Atari crash.
I know.
So
at that point, if I'm getting my timeline correct, video games were already starting to show signs of decline.
Yes.
And then E.T. just destroyed all the legs that it was standing on. But Donkey Kong is what showed them that there was still something to be seen, something for them to work on, and that's what they were doing up until the crash happened.
Right. So, I mean, you have the original Donkey Kong, which originally was an arcade game made by Nintendo, and you had to jump across platforms and over gaps and up ladders to rescue Pauline from Donkey Kong. And, well, at that time, Mario wasn't called Mario, he was called Jumpman.
Yes. Sounds like an anime superhero.
Yes, Jumpman. So, that was the first one, and it was just a single screen. It's just that the game would get progressively harder, the level layouts would be different.
Also, shortly after that, we also had Donkey Kong Jr.
Yes.
Which, that actually, because a lot of people, they hear Donkey Kong, and they think about how big that one was, and they think Mario, which came, 4 years after, 85?
Yep.
But in between that, Donkey Kong Jr. only came out a little while after Donkey Kong, And Donkey Kong Jr. was hugely successful as well.
Absolutely. However, it wasn't until Mario Brothers, though, that I think we both can agree it actually set the standard.
Oh, definitely.
For a decade plus.
Okay, even now, like there are platform games that try new things, but Mario is still like the first Mario Brothers set the standard. I think Mario 3, which we'll get to in this, but I think that kind of like that's what everything is basically like. Everything's basically based off that. It's how are you doing it differently than that?
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, Super Mario Brothers is one of the. I mean, it is one of the best-selling games of all time, if not the best-selling game of all time. And yeah, I mean, you have...
For good reason.
And, you know, it took me 15 years to beat that game.
I beat it once when I was much younger, but I picked up the game relatively recently, and I got to the final stage, but the final set of levels.
World 8.
Final world, thank you, yes, World 8. And I'm playing it, and I'm going, how the heck did I do this? This is harder than I remember.
Yeah, it's you know, especially there's that one jump in World 8. I forget where. I think it was 8-2 or 8-3, where you also have to time it so perfectly.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, well, there's also the world in the level in World 8 when basically the timer is so low that you have to run the entire length of the screen. Like, you can't stop the entire level. That's the one that always would mess me up. Because I'm really good if I have a chance to time my stuff, but I just kept dying. Dying. Which is a lot of what these old games were.
Oh yes, there was. If you beat any of these games, you had bragging rights.
You also learned the power of patience.
Or you didn't, and you had many broken controllers. But
both. That's the journey into the power of patience.
Yes,
it's paved with broken controllers.
Yes, or TVs, or consoles, or cartridges.
The Wii brought that back.
Yes. Absolutely, I certainly agree with you there.
We've gone a little off subject at this point, though.
That's all right. I mean, you know, platforming games, which originated in the early 80s, I mean, obviously they're evolving, so a lot of firsts are going on.
It's amazing how many of the, like, memorable franchises from back then, they were all platforming games for the most part.
Absolutely. Mega Man 1, 1987.
Mega Man 2 right after that, probably one of the defining platforming games of all time.
And you know, I just beat the first Mega Man game a couple of weeks ago.
I saw your Facebook post on that.
I had downloaded it on Virtual Console, and I was inspired to play it because I saw Bit Brigade at PAX, and I was inspired by the fact that not only was the band playing the music to the levels of the player, the fact that the player speed ran the original Legend of Zelda in 45 minutes, just, I said, alright, let me go back to these old school games. So I had Mega Man, and so I just fired it up, and I said, you know what? There are 6 levels in this game. 7. How hard can this be?
There was your first mistake.
Actually, I was doing pretty well. I mean, Mega Man 1 was challenging. It's definitely challenging. But I really didn't have a problem. Nothing I couldn't really handle until I got to the first boss in Dr. Wily's stage.
Refresh my memory. Which one is that? I know all the bosses, but I don't remember the order.
That's the rock monster, which...
Is that big yellow one?
Yes.
The demon. Yeah, the yellow demon.
Yes.
I've beaten that game, but I've never beaten the yellow demon without using the cheat.
Which I ended up having to use because well, I don't.
We all have to use.
I don't consider it a cheat if it's in game. It was a glitch.
Well, yeah, okay. Cheat, not so much as glitch. It definitely wasn't intended that way.
It wasn't intended to be the case, but that wonderful pause trick when you're using the electric gun. Oh, that was beautiful.
Were you using the electric attack, or were you using the special item you pick up?
I was using the electric attack.
Okay, you can do that. It actually works the best. There's a special. You can get another item. It's hidden in one of the stages. You have to have Gutsman's power to get it.
Yes.
And it shoots out that little beam.
The magnet cannon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to use it with that because you can get more hits off.
Yep, either one worked. I used the electric.
Yeah. The electric one works too.
But Mega Man was the first platforming game to have a non-linear progression. You had the first 6 levels, and you could play them in any order you wanted.
Yes, you could. Well, actually, I'll bring this one up. What year was Mega Man? Do you know?
87.
87? Because I'm looking up something real quick before I say something that is completely wrong. I would say the first one with non-linear progression would be Metroid, that came a year earlier.
Okay. That could also work.
Not to knock down your thing.
No. Because I know Metroid though. You mean you're only playing as Samus.
Yeah.
You're only playing as Samus. I mean, you don't have the option in Metroid
of different worlds.
Of actually.
There are two different ways of doing it. Like,
right.
You start with this one world, but you are free roaming where you want to go.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, really, when you look back on it, like, series that nowadays people still know that started platformers, and for some of them still are. You have, of course, the Super Mario games, without a doubt. He's still around today. Mega Man, Metroid, Castlevania, the Kirby series, and that's all just early Nintendo. I mean, if we start getting into Genesis with Sonic the Hedgehog and all the games in there, I mean, like, so many classic games started as platformers in this era.
Absolutely. I mean, some of our you mentioned already, some of our most memorable games of all time are platformers.
Some of them didn't continue to get sequels, but I'll say one very memorable game from my childhood that came from this was the original DuckTales game.
I was in GameStop today and I saw the DuckTales game for the PS3.
Mm-hmm. Remastered?
Yes.
Yep. Have you actually played that?
I have not.
It's actually, if you didn't play the original DuckTales game, I would say play it. It's good. They did a good job with it.
No, I thought about buying a game, but no, I went to GameStop to get some PlayStation credit because I wanted to purchase Ubisoft's latest project, Child of Light. But that's a whole.
That's not part of this one, but I've been keeping my eye on that as well. So, but you have a couple lesser known ones you want to talk about from the NES days?
I am trying to remember. There was a game that I loved, and it is so obscure for the NES. It was called, I think it's called Air Fortress.
I actually think I've heard of that. I don't know if I played it. I'm gonna look it up real fast while you're talking.
You're playing around essentially in a spaceship for a bunch.
That NES cover. That is so NES.
Yes. Oh, it was made by HAL. I didn't know that. But yes, that was. I loved Air Fortress. I never beat it. Air Fortress is basically an alien invasion storyline. The people.
It kind of looks like a more primitive Metroid. Like looking at the pictures.
Yes, except you don't have. It's not free roaming.
Okay. Well, still, I mean, just the way they set it up, it looks like the way it plays would be kind of similar.
And Air Fortress came out in '89, so you're going through all these different levels, all these air fortresses. It's kind of a bad version, and I look back on it, of the movie Independence Day.
Yep. Wait, a bad version of Independence Day. That's implying Independence Day is good? I love Independence Day, but I had to poke the fun.
Yeah, of course, it's all right.
Yeah, so tell me about it.
Let's see. I haven't touched this game in 20 years. you were playing in a spaceship, and you had to. I think it was like this alien. It took place in space, and there's this like space colony or something, but this alien race, they're sending a herd of uh, air fortresses, hence the title, which are basically all self-contained units.
Ooh, I'm just looking at it right now. It had two modes: one like shooter, one like jet shooter, and then one regular action. That's kind of cool.
Yes.
That kind of reminds me of Guardian Legends.
And I remember that now because you had I think the first part of the level was the approach phase in which you were in your little dinky ship. And then once you get into the air fortress itself, it sort of becomes like Metroid.
Okay. Well, that actually sounds kind of. I was gonna say this actually sounds kind of interesting. I wonder how it played.
Oh, I loved this game. I was so addicted to this game when I was 8.
I'll say for me, this isn't as unknown, but the game that kind of defined my childhood that a lot of other people had never played, at least near here, was Wizards and Warriors.
Which I've heard of, yep.
Yeah, where you play as this knight who's going on this quest, and like you get all these different items and abilities. You can float. You can get things that let you float. You can get things that let you there's all these different items that you get throughout the game, and it would be a great game if it wasn't for your sword. Your sword, you hold it. If you have your hand out in front of you, and imagine a sword's coming out of it, and your hand is not angled at all. Like, maybe it's angled slightly. That is your hit range. Your sword is probably 3 pixels away from your character because it's pointed up, not out. Like, you're not stabbing out with it. It's pointed up and slightly off from you. And that's your hit range. You just wave it like that. If you take a look at any picture and you see how his sword is, that's not just how he holds it. That's your hit range.
Okay.
It makes it so hard and frustrating to kill anything.
I'll bet.
But it's such a good game otherwise that it makes you want to keep playing it.
Another platform game that I used to have for the NES is a game that was made by Data East. It's called Karnov.
I don't even think I've heard of Karnov.
Karnov, Karnov, you're playing as Karnov, which is this, like, really muscly, bulging muscle, strongman Russian guy. And the object of the game is you're going through each level searching for treasures. However, there's a whole litany of monsters preventing between you and the treasure at the end of each level.
So, big muscly guy. So, a Bobo's Big Adventure?
If I ever played Bobo's Big Adventure, I would know what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll tell you about it later when we're not on a podcast.
The reference is completely lost on me.
A Bobo was a major villain from the Double Dragon games. They made a parody game called A Bobo's Big Adventure of a Bobo, that villain, going through old school Nintendo games and beating the crap out of everybody. So, like, a Bobo would be in a Mario game, or a Bobo would be in, like, he would just show up in other games, and it would totally satire, like, old games.
Interesting. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention a platforming game that to this day I cannot finish.
What's that?
And that would be the first Ninja Gaiden.
Oh, I don't blame you for not being able to finish that.
I get to level 6-2, and that's 3 levels away from the end of the game. I can't do it.
That and Ghosts and Goblins are probably the 2 most difficult platformers of all time.
I mean, I know there are people who have beaten it, but I just...
Myths.
I cannot... Because Ninja Gaiden, what makes it so hard is that enemies infinitely respawn.
Yep.
Like, Ninja Gaiden is one of those platforming games where it's one of those early games where you have the ability to move left or right. And
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I have played Ninja Gaiden. It's been a long time. Ninja Gaiden had lives, but you had infinite continues, but it would start you at the beginning of the set of stages. Right?
Sometimes.
Okay.
You had infinite continues.
I knew, yeah.
But in the later stages, if you sometimes.
Well, that's why I said set of stages, because the last, if you die in if you lose all your continues in the last set of stages, doesn't it bring you back aren't the last 3 stages all basically considered one set of things?
Yes.
You start at the beginning of those 3?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what makes Ninja Gaiden so... this is one of those games where I actually define it as unfair. When as a little kid, you'd get so angry at a game and accuse it of cheating.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I want to talk to my friends who've played Dark Souls and have them play Ninja Gaiden and ask them, is this the same as hard, or is one or the other harder? Because Dark Souls is definitely the current generation's version of Ninja Gaiden in that, the difficult game that all other games are judged by. And I've never played Dark Souls, so I don't know where the comparison is. Is it worse? Is it better? Is it the same? I don't know. I do know I can't afford to break controllers anymore, so I'm not going to get that.
And here's the thing about, Ninja Gaiden, you can move left or right in any direction. The problem is, as soon as you move or have to backtrack, an enemy you just killed will respawn. Also, Ninja Gaiden is loaded with areas where you can be standing still and an enemy will come at you and you'll hit the enemy and you'll kill it, and another one immediately forms where it started from. It'll just endlessly respawn until you move. Not to mention the fact that Tecmo also strategically places these enemies for maximum cheapness.
I love when they throw enemies that can hit you from a distance right where you have to make one of your most difficult jumps.
Oh, that happens a lot in Ninja Gaiden. Yeah, there's this...
It's more likely to happen than not happen.
Yes. There's this one area in Area 6-2 where you have to make this obscene jump, but as soon as you start jumping, in swoops in a bird, which hits you and causes you to plummet to your death.
Oh.
So basically you have to do one of these jobbies where when you're jumping, you have to lash out with your sword and pray that the hit detection is correct.
It's like the Medusa heads in Castlevania. Just coming across the screen, knocking you down all the pits.
Yep, that's Ninja Gaiden, and I've given up. I'm like, nope, I'm sorry.
I mean, but yeah, we'll go back into talking about some of the ones people might have heard of. I mean, they tried a lot of things with platformers. They were much more experimental back then.
Absolutely.
I mean, you had Metroid, which was, as far as I know, the first real free-roaming game where, yes, you have areas you can't get to because you don't have a specific item or weapon, but for the most part, you went where you wanted to go. And once you got an item, you backtrack through and go back through the other ones. But it was really it was the start of the open world concept that a lot of stuff today owes a debt of gratitude to. You had Castlevania where you had Castlevania 3? Yeah, Castlevania 3 was when they introduced switching between different characters, and each of them had different powers. That's where Alucard got his start. And that was something you hadn't really seen before, with each character having their own defined abilities and stuff like that you could switch in-game. So you had that, and just the Castlevania series in general just was all kinds of awesome. You already brought up Mega Man with being able to choose and switch between different levels. I'm not entirely sure if any other game had done that before. It was used multiple times since then. But I mean, one of the things I think defines platforming back then, right now, you can correct me if you disagree with me, but right now, for the most part, outside of indie games, platforming is all pretty much like one type of game.
Yeah.
Back then, platformers were all over the place. They were all trying new things. They weren't trying to go, this game did it good, so we need to make that game again, or that game slightly changed with our characters. They were going, wow, look, these platforming games are doing awesome. Let's do something awesome. Let's do something different. Let's do this idea or that idea. And of course, there were smaller teams back then. I mean, a couple of them were only done by 3 or 4 people. So they had a lot. With the smaller teams, they were able to come up with different things that maybe as a group they wouldn't have. And there was less oversight where they said, go make games. So they went and made games.
Oh, yes, definitely experimental. I mean, and even, platform games, even now, the few that still get made now, they were also experimental. They like to cross genres. I mean, take Contra, for example.
Yes.
You're adding a shooter element to that game.
And it made one of the most classic games on the system.
Absolutely. It's just they were not afraid to cross.
And think about
cross
this
the
way.
streams.
As of right now, this whole even people who were not born in the 80s know the Konami code, the Contra code.
Yes.
Everybody does.
And
they just used it on a completely separate subject. They just used the Konami code in a Magic the Gathering scavenger hunt on their website as part of the release of their new set. That was the code they chose to use. Because enough people would figure it out.
And, in Contra, you needed all 30 lives. My goodness.
Oh, holy hell, yes.
Yes, you needed
totally
it.
Did.
And I still haven't beaten it. But,
it's not even that long of a game. It's just so relentingly hard.
No. So...
I'll say, my dirty little secret, I've beaten I've beaten Mega Man. I've beaten Contra. I never beat the first Metroid. I never did. When I was a kid, I could never find one of the necessary items, and I've never really gone back to it. I actually own it on Virtual Console, and every so often
you think about it.
I think about picking it up, and then I'm like, I'm gonna be playing this for the next 4 days if I start it. So do I really want to do this with my life right now?
So moving on. I think we spent a lot of time in the NES era, so moving on to better consoles.
Better? Wait. Newer, you mean?
Newer and better. I think my favorite console of all time is Super Nintendo, so...
I would not necessarily disagree that Super Nintendo is one of the best ones, but I would rather say newer than better, because the NES is freaking classic.
Yes, absolutely. So we get the Sega Genesis, we get a new challenger, and the Super Nintendo. So now we get the console wars in the 90s going, and a new slew of memorable platforming games. Sonic, Sega's answer to Mario.
Yes.
And all of the incredible joy I had and frustration with the Sonic the Hedgehog series. Took me a decade to get past the chemical plant zone in Sonic 2.
Different experience for me. I've never seen the Sonic games to be as difficult as a lot of the old NES games. That was just me.
I can agree there.
It's not that they weren't hard. I'm not going to say there wasn't difficulty in them, but once you've played through some of those ones, it's the Sonic games were always fun for me, but I would not call them difficult for me.
There's a reason why we still have the phrase Nintendo hard in the lexicon. It's a...
Oh, yeah. Which they definitely toned down in the Super Nintendo era.
Absolutely.
I think because they finally learned how to make video games.
Yeah, the fact that I could actually beat games in the Super Nintendo was a big sign.
I actually think the first game I ever beat was on Super Nintendo, because it took me a long time. I had to get older to be able to beat some of the regular Nintendo games. It wasn't until after I got my Super Nintendo I beat some of them.
Yeah, agreed. Likewise. I remember, and I touched upon this in the Sega Genesis episode. One of my favorite Sega games is Streets of Rage.
Streets of Rage is a great game.
Streets of Rage, Golden Axe.
I forget which Streets of Rage it was, but I always used to play the kid with the rollerblades.
Was that? It was either the second or the third.
I think it might have been the second one. He might be in the third one too, but I think it's the second one I'm thinking of.
So I think the third one had the kangaroo.
Yes, it did. Yes, and as you said, Golden Axe, amazing game, and I would say a very good arcade port.
Yes.
It was a pretty good arcade port. A personal favorite of mine was, don't mind me, I completely brain farted. Please continue what you were saying.
Okay, so while you think about that, one of my
Altered Beast. That's what I was thinking of.
Altered Beast, which is also great.
I agree. I hear so many people who are down on it because the arcade version was better, and I'm like, I never got to play the arcade version when I was young, and you want to know what? This is fine. This is good.
Absolutely. One of my most memorable platforming games of the Super Nintendo era. I still play it, even though I've beaten it a million times. Donkey Kong Country.
Donkey Kong Country was amazing, and I'm so glad that it's made a comeback now.
Donkey Kong Country, and I played Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3. Just
look at the other games that came out in the same year as Donkey Kong Country, and then look at Donkey Kong Country and go, it plays amazing, but it just looks amazing for its time. Like, it looked so good. And it wasn't disappointing when you played it, like a lot of games that look good.
It was... Donkey Kong Country had, I think, at that time when I played it as a kid, the most perfect balance of game and difficulty.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Because there were definitely frustrating moments in that game. One of the hardest levels I remember in that game was the Cryptopolis Chase, where you have the... It was an underwater level, and every time you passed one of those octopus things, they would chase you.
Yep. I wasn't sure what level you were talking about for a second, and then you mentioned that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
And then a similar level, it was one of the, I think it was during the Second World, where you had the little gopher things in the big, huge stone wheels that would also give chase.
But yeah, like I said, I'm very glad Donkey Kong Country's made a bit of a comeback now. It's one of those series that had kind of dropped off the face of the earth. Like, they had Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, and then there was something planned for the N64. I don't think it ever came out. I know they did Diddy Kong Racing.
And they also did, I think they did Donkey Kong 64.
Did they? I know if they did do it, it ended up being pushed back a lot, because I remember reading about it supposed to be coming out, and then it kind of fell off the radar. If it did come out, I never ended up getting to play it.
Donkey Kong...
Yes, it did. It did end up coming out.
Yeah.
And it did end up getting pushed back, yes. Okay, continue, I'm sorry.
No problem. I know there was some platforming games during the Super Nintendo and Genesis days that I know a lot of people played that I never did, like Earthworm Jim.
Yeah, the Earthworm Jim games. I did not own them. My friend did. I played through quite a bit of them, and it definitely had an interesting sense of humor. I didn't feel like it had as much replay value as some of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like, once you saw the jokes, that was probably enough, which made it kind of similar to the Toe Jam and Earl, where I didn't feel like it had that much replayability. The jokes were funny, but once you saw them, it was kind of like, oh, okay, that's been done. It didn't have as much lasting fun for me. Maybe it's just not my kind of game.
Okay.
But one I want to bring up. Now, we mentioned earlier one of the series from the NES that's still around today is Kirby.
Yep.
Everybody knows Kirby. He's the cutest little guy in the Super Smash Bros. Games. Well, Kirby Superstar on the Super Nintendo was the first Kirby I ever played. I played the NES and Game Boy ones after this. Did you ever play Kirby Superstar?
No.
Okay. Kirby Superstar was basically 6 Kirby games put into one, but most of them were like little mini games that you could go to and choose, and they had their own little things. And then it had like 1 or 2 basically full-length games in it. One of which is the one I always remember. I could look it up right now, but I'm not going to, because they all had names. But it's one where you went from planet to planet, and each planet, you're on your little star, and you went from planet to planet, and each planet had different, each planet was its own level, and there were secret levels and everything that you could unlock, but Kirby could take powers, I believe Kirby could take powers like he normally did, but in this one, you found treasure chests where you could pick up the items, and then you could switch them like you were in Mega Man. So like you could pick up his forms and then go back to that form whenever you wanted, once you found it in a chest. And I thought that was the way Kirby always worked, because it was the first time I played it. Little would I get a little bit disappointed later on when I found out that's not how it worked. But that game would keep me occupied for hours. It was such just a fun game where you could just go to your favorite levels or whatnot and play it. I really enjoyed that. There's actually I think they put that on Virtual Console relatively recently. Not relatively recently, but they put it on the Virtual Console. I'm going to look that up right now.
Well, you go ahead and do that.
They definitely put it out on the Virtual Console. I highly recommend this to anyone out there right now. I am not being paid by the Kirby lobby, but I would like to say that Kirby Superstar is an amazing game, and for every one of you that signs up, I get $50. Oh, wait, what?
Ronnie is not a paid spokesperson for Kirby. Void were prohibited.
There we go. Gotta get all of that in there.
Although, as a side note...
this is what I was thinking of. It wasn't Virtual Console. They released Kirby Superstar Ultra on the Nintendo DS about 6 years ago. They did put it out on Virtual Console as well, but that's what I was thinking of, where they did a remake of it with new modes. Okay, that's all I was saying.
Okay. One sort of side note, I didn't know this until right now, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy has been taken down from the Virtual Console.
Boo.
It was taken down as around March of last year, for no reason. Nintendo has not actually specified a reason why they took them down. So, I'm very lucky. I got them both. I got all 3 of them when they were up.
That is a very sad thing.
So,
You still haven't said any reason why?
Nintendo has not put out any reason. So, yeah. A lot of people think that, it had something to do with Rare, but Rare said, Nintendo owns Donkey Kong. We had nothing to do with it.
Weird things like that happen all the frickin' time. It's sad.
Well, Nintendo has not been very, very good with their business strategies as of late, so that's a whole separate rant.
That could be an entire podcast or 2 all on its own.
Yeah, it would be entitled, Why Nintendo? But,
So I think we finished up on the Super Nintendo. Want to lead us into the brave new future?
Yeah, the last thing we'll talk about before we cut to the break is we're going to talk about platforming entering the 3D realm.
Woo!
With the advent of the N64 and the PlayStation. Where it was
with the Spyros and the Jet Set Radios and Prince of Persia and Crash Bandicoot and Mario 64.
Yes, Mario. At the time, though, developers were wondering, well, how the hell do we make the transition? Because, we're talking about a type of genre that lives and dies by level progression, mostly linearity.
And then Nintendo knocks it out of the ballpark with Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time and teaches people this is how you make 3D games.
Ocarina of Time is considered platformer?
No, we were talking about moving into 3D.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm like,
yes, two completely different ones, but I was more mentioning the transition to 2D to 3D. Nintendo really nailed it on their first walkthrough.
Point taken. But yes, Mario 64...
Not as much with Castlevania.
Mario 64 set the new standard on how to do platforming in 3D. And so we got the floodgates opened. Mario 64 was incredibly enjoyable.
I would say Mario 64 is one of the best games of all time.
It certainly is. I also remember, though, however, spending a lot of time playing Crash Bandicoot.
Crash Bandicoot. I didn't even get into Crash Bandicoot until long after most other people. But I do enjoy it. I have played it just later. But one person who really loves Crash Bandicoot, who I would have talking here if she hadn't just left, is my wife. Because that's what she grew up on, and to her, that's what a platformer was. And that's one thing I think is important for some people to understand is, for people who got in during the PlayStation era, the PlayStation 64, if you got a PlayStation, you were introduced to platforming through Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, maybe some Spyro. Like these are what you learned on as your platformers.
Yes. And while they might not have the same frustrating to hell difficulty as the platformers that Ronny and I grew up with, they're still no less enjoyable.
Oh, they're very fun. One game that I think actually had a pretty similar level of difficulty was Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia was a hard game.
Which I never played.
I was going to say, it was a very, very difficult game. I mean, maybe not Ninja Gaiden level, but certainly frustrating enough for you to be gripping your controller pretty tightly.
I'll bet. I mean, nothing can... I mean, Ninja Gaiden, I think, is the top of my difficulty scale.
There's very few things that can top Ninja Gaiden. Here's the funny thing. There's one or two games I would put as hard as Ninja Gaiden. I don't think any of those games are as unfair as Ninja Gaiden. Half of Ninja Gaiden's difficulty isn't necessarily its difficulty, which is incredibly hard, but it's the way it sets up its difficulty in the way to be most frustrating.
Well, as I said earlier, they put their enemies in the most strategic locations for maximum cheapness. That's how it works.
That's exactly right. So,
another game that I never played, I never owned it when I had the N64, but I know a lot of people who did, Banjo-Kazooie.
Okay, I never played Banjo-Kazooie. I've heard to this day how good it is, and I've never run across a copy for my N64. If I find one, I'm probably going to pick it up.
Yeah, because it's not on Virtual Console.
Yeah.
A lot of the rare titles made during that era will not see the light of day.
Well, Rare and Nintendo had a nice falling out, so...
Oh, yeah. I think it was a bit acrimonious.
I don't think Rare has as many bad feelings for Nintendo as much as it is Nintendo wants to pretend that Rare never existed.
Yes. I think that's probably the best analogy I've heard.
But yeah, I mean, for ones that are particularly memorable from that time period for me, first of all, Jet Set Radio, which is another kind of... I'm not even sure... Like, I think its closest to platformer would be what I'd consider it. Mm-hmm. Because it is a platforming game. There is jumping. There is stuff like that. But it was definitely them trying something different. Very different. And I think it's a very memorable game from that time period because of it.
Yep.
So you have that. I know Spyro and Banjo-Kazooie both had this, but I love how they incorporated gliding into the Spyro games. I think that was an interesting, I won't say new approach, because Mario could fly, but in the 3D games, it really gave you a new way to explore. It really felt like something new that you hadn't seen before. So that was always a really good thing in there. Like I said, this is where Mario 64 set the new standard, as you said. As you know, this is what one should be. And then I feel like a lot that came afterwards, you had like 3 or 4 different kinds of games, and then everything was just trying to make a better version of those games, which is fine. If you're making improvements and you're making an enjoyable game, this is not a knock on you. But it felt like this is where the number of games trying something new started to focus into just a couple of different types.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely as we headed into...
like the Tomb Raider type, the Mario 64 type. I mean, there's, like I said, there were still experimental titles. There were still the Jet Set Radios. There were other ones. But they were definitely... I think a lot of it was more genres were popping up to take space from platformers, which is awesome because I love a lot of other genres. But before, when platformers were like, half of the games that were out, there was a lot of space to try new things.
Absolutely, and definitely as video gaming got into the 21st century, we noticed an immense decline. As the technology got better, it allowed for different types of games to be made.
I think this is the beginning of it. This is the start of the decline. Even when, with how good some of these games were, the numbers were already on the way.
There's a stat here that I just pulled up on Wikipedia. In 1998, platform games had a 15% market share, and even higher during their heyday in the 90s, the earlier 90s. But then in 2002, that 15% market share dropped down to 2%.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, platforming games are heading into major decline around this time.
You want to know what? What they don't tell you is that out of that 2%, 1% of that was Mario games.
Probably. You're probably right. So we will end the first half on this note. On our second half, we're going to discuss, the continued decline of platforming. But then they start seeing a little bit of a resurgence.
It's rebirth like a phoenix.
We start seeing a bit of rebirth, again, spearheaded by Nintendo, but also the indie scene. We will talk about that in our second half. In the meantime, you will have a few minutes of music. We'll cut out, maybe play a level of Mega Man or two during the break. And
do you really want me to be that angry when I get back?
Well, how about a nice, easy platform? Maybe Donkey Kong Country, a little easier.
Kirby's Epic Yarn, I'll throw that.
Oh my god. Kirby's Epic Yarn is like the NPR of platforming games.
We will be talking about that later.
Yes, we will. So, that'll be on our second half. We'll be back. content. Thanks for joining us in our second half here, still talking about platforming games. None of us have gone away, all two of us.
Well, I don't know. I could be in a closet now,
You could.
visiting the children I keep in the basement.
You could. That's entirely possible. I mean, it's a freakish
How do you-
house you have.
How do you think I find out about all these platformers? I have them in my basement playing games, trying to tell me which ones are worth playing. How do you find good games, Brian?
Well, I don't have a basement where I keep children in.
Well, that's right. You don't have a basement. I can't blame you for that.
I don't. That's just an apartment complex. I mean, I can't hide. You know.
Well, that's very sad. You need to look into that for your next step.
Yes, I'll definitely, something where I can keep small children so that they can inform me on the latest and greatest platforming games. Excellent. Moving on.
Into those games.
Into those games. So we left off in the first half talking about how platformers were starting to decline as we got into the 21st century. With there was this perception around the turn of the century where platforming games were suddenly viewed as games that are only meant for younger audiences and that they're not hot sellers.
Did they forget that during the NES days there were just as many adults playing the platform games as the kids were? Really?
Ronnie, you and I know that marketing executives have no fucking idea what the hell they're talking about.
Okay, the NES was marketed for kids. There's no doubt about that. And they see anything that's associated with the NES is associated with kids. Even though when my first time playing NES wasn't one I owned. My grandmother owned it. And my uncles played it. And I would get to play it occasionally. And eventually I got my own. But that was 5 adults that were all playing on the system, playing Mega Man and Mario Brothers. Adults played back then. They just when they were trying to make PlayStation the not that there weren't kids games as well, but when they were trying to market it so adults would buy it as well, they were trying to distance themselves from anything that seemed childish, and which basically meant anything from the original Nintendo. And platforming games were their hallmark.
Basically, but
original and Super Nintendo. But when I'm saying Nintendo, you can generalize that to being the Nintendo zeitgeist.
Essentially, yes. So I mean, I remember the decline of platforming games. I mean, there were times when I had gone years without touching a platforming game because you couldn't find any.
See, here's the thing. I never really noticed because at that point there were so many my other favorite type of game. There were so many good RPGs that I was just like, and I never even noticed there weren't platformers for quite a while.
Same thing, but I mean, I was glued into Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid. I mean, we had all these new games coming out that I didn't.
It took time for us to notice the absence.
It's like, hey. And, I didn't really notice that.
I think a huge part of it was and people are going to fight me on this, and I'm going to say this, and I already know there's going to be people outside of my building waiting for fisticuffs, but it was because of the failure of the N64. The N64, I'm not saying that it was like a Sega CD level failure or a 32X, but the N64, I don't think it's any secret that it was not as successful as they wished it had been.
Right.
And I think that was a huge part of it because Nintendo had always defined itself as this is where platform games count. So I don't think it was just as much, first of all, yes, distancing themselves from being childish, but I think a lot of it was also trying to differentiate them from what Nintendo's been. And it didn't help that Nintendo's N64, for the most part, I won't say it didn't lend itself to platforming games, because there were a lot of good ones, Mario 64 being one of the best ones ever. But I think a lot of companies weren't really sure what to do.
Well, also then, with the advent of PlayStation and the disc-based game becoming the medium of choice, a lot of Nintendo's struggles are from their own pig-headedness and their own stubbornness. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes, let's be honest. I'm going to be completely honest. The biggest flaw of the N64 was not having end labels on its cartridges. It had done it in the last two systems. In this one, they felt the need to be different in a bad way.
Yes, well.
That's all their failures trace back to this.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, moving on. So, it wasn't until, it wasn't really until the Wii, and we get games like Super Mario Galaxy, in which, despite platformers starting to get, now getting, a bad rap, Mario Galaxy was critically acclaimed up and down.
Super Mario Galaxy was the next step after Mario 64. It was a natural progression, and I think the disappointment was it was a natural progression that should have happened 10 years earlier. Okay, maybe less than 10 years earlier, but you know what I mean.
I mean, we had Mario Galaxy, which, great game. Amazing game.
Yeah.
And
which introduced Rosalina, a character that now is you'll see on the Wii on the new Mario sports games and the Mario Kart.
Honestly, I was actually waiting for you to say that it's your new favorite character to cosplay.
Actually, I'm. God, yeah, yes. She's probably my favorite character in the Mario franchise now. Did you have to make me say it?
Yes, I did. Because
Sadist.
I'm the host here, and this is my domain. So
well, it's kind of funny, because here's the thing. You associate me with loving female characters and stuff. Up until Rosalina came out, my favorite character was Luigi. I never liked Peach.
Well, Peach...
Not that I disliked her. Not getting that point, but, I always liked Luigi. He was kind of cowardly guy that had to step it up and man up. And I always thought that, I think a hero is braver if they know fear than ones who just, don't seem to feel it. Which I think is the difference between Mario and Luigi.
Fair enough.
Leading into characters that were made in the 8-bit era.
Fair enough. But yes, Mario Galaxy, was an amazing game, and it did it. It made me start thinking, has it really been that long since we've had a platforming game? A big name platforming game? Yeah, just about. I mean, there was a couple of other good examples. We had Mirror's Edge, Sonic Unleashed, although, even that's open to debate. There's still some who think that Sonic should have never left the 2D plane.
Well, here's the thing. Sorry about that. Sonic Adventure would be a platformer.
Yep.
I would argue that. And Sonic Adventure was pretty damn good. Okay, maybe subject to debate. I really enjoyed Sonic Adventure.
And it's only recently that platforming games really started to see a revival, and again, spearheaded by Nintendo.
I think a huge portion of that... I think a huge portion of that is the handheld market. I think the success of platformers in the handheld market is what made Nintendo do what it's doing on its consoles now. I can't prove that without going in, breaking in, and, taking some people hostage, but I'm pretty sure that's the information I would get. Because, honestly, platformers have never really left the handheld games.
No.
And I think that's one thing that we haven't really touched on, and I don't think was even in our... I hadn't even thought about talking about it yet, but platformers weren't just on the consoles. Platformers were a huge part of the handheld market.
Absolutely. I mean, you have some great games that got their start on the handheld market. Kirby.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. Back in the original Game Boy. Oh, God. Now Kirby's making me feel old.
Yeah, well, that'll happen.
But one thing we haven't really recognized is we're talking about the decline of platformers, but really what we're talking about is the decline of console platformers, like home console, because they never left they never left on the handheld systems. They were always there.
True, but they did not get the same hype and attention and adoration of the gaming.
Well, I don't think with the exception of Pokemon, most handheld games fly under the radar. It's kind of like mobile games are very much like they're kind of like the base rock for gaming in that you have to be exceptionally over the top to become well known as a handheld game. But handheld games very much like a lot of ideas that come up in handheld games are what move on into the consoles because they will try to test an idea or they'll see what works in the handheld market and then they'll do a full-fledged version of it in the console market.
That is true.
I'm not just talking out my ass, right?
No, you're not talking about it. No,
okay, good.
You're good. But, I mean, just in terms of hype and attention that they get, I mean, we barely hear about them. It's only through word of mouth from players, largely.
I'd agree with that.
But, you know,
which this is another parallel between platformers and RPGs in that both of them kind of had a decline, but both of them thrived in the handheld market. The handheld market is a very good place because it doesn't take as much money to make your games. For them to be able to try new things and be able to do stuff that still has a fan base, but that they don't think are going to be smash hits that they could do on the consoles. And I think that's one thing that's benefited both RPGs and platformers.
That's very true. But,
now that I'm done dominating the conversation.
That's okay. It's all right. It's just the two of us. You're allowed. That's the two of us. As I was starting to mention, that platforming started to see a revival with Nintendo at the helm with the Wii. We mentioned Mario Galaxy, but there's also a bit of a retro revival going on. The new Super Mario Brothers series.
Yes, sir. That brought platforming to the forefront in a way that it hadn't been in years. Even more so to me than Super Mario Galaxy. Because
I can agree with that.
Super Mario Galaxy was a great 3D Mario game, but I think that the new Super Mario Brothers reminded people of why they loved the originals.
Although nowhere near as hard.
Well, yes, but if it was as hard, I would argue I don't know if it would be as popular.
That is true.
Because it's not like these are people who'd been acclimated to this for many years. And honestly, Brian, I have a question for you.
Yes.
And I think I already know your answer. Now, I'm not saying that being a hard game is necessarily detrimental to it, but a game doesn't have to be hard to be fun.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think some people go, well, it's not that difficult. Okay, maybe you need a certain level of difficulty that other people don't for your enjoyment. And there's some people who are like that, but I think, at least for me, a game can be easy and still be a blast to play.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Like, I'll give you an example. Not necessarily a platformer, but, it's related somewhat to this. I beat Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon a little while ago. That game was a blast. It wasn't hard, but I enjoyed every second of it. That's kind of what... Like, I'd have no... being hard is not a detriment to me, as we'll go into later in this podcast, because I got a specific one I want to bring up. But being hard isn't necessarily a positive for me either. It all depends on the game.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Depends on what it's trying to do.
Certainly, absolutely, I can agree with that. So we had the new Super Mario Brothers series, which very popular, very loved.
It's the return of a lot of classic games. I mean, like you said, the new Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong Country, the new Donkey Kong Country returns. Kirby's Epic Yarn, one of my favorite platformers.
Kirby's Epic Yarn, that's an interesting game. I mean, I haven't finished it, but it
obviously because of its unrelenting difficulty.
I haven't finished it largely because it's so freaking adorable. and I can't play it for too long without devolving into just this puddle of cute.
You need to check your blood sugar afterwards.
It's like, oh my god, this is so adorable, this game. And it renders me unable to speak English because of just how cute everything is.
Yeah, that's a very common symptom of the yarn fever. You should get it checked out.
I probably should, but otherwise, it's a fun game.
What I love is that it's a 2-player game, because me and my wife can play it together.
Yes,
and I think that's a major plus, and I think that's a major plus for a lot of the newer ones, like the new Super Mario Brothers games. They're multiplayer games, but not like online multiplayer. This is somebody sitting next to you.
Yes,
that you can hit in the back of the head for letting you die. Like this is the kind of multiplayer we grew up with.
Yep,
it's awesome.
Absolutely, it was. Although you find out very quickly, because I played the multiplayer on New Super Mario Brothers for the Wii, and you realize who the dick in your party is. You know, the person who steals all the lives and just wants to be in your group just to kill you all.
Well, if you've ever played D&D with your friends, you already know who that guy is.
Yes. You already know who the asshole is. Donkey Kong Country Returns, which I have also started, and I'm enjoying that immensely.
That game is right now sitting in my to-be-played pile, so I can't speak too much on it.
The only major thing that I would like, that is like, I wish that they kept what you had in the original Donkey Kong Country, in which you could switch back and forth between Diddy Kong and Donkey Kong.
I agree with that. Well, see, my favorite of the 3 originals was Donkey Kong Country 2, because I loved playing Dixie.
Okay.
Same thing as, even though she's not my favorite character, in Super Mario Bros. 2, I love playing the princess, because I like the gliding mechanic.
The most broken character of that game.
Yes, and you say that like it's bad.
Actually, when I played Super Mario Bros. 2, I almost never played as Peach. I usually played as Luigi because of his incredible jumping ability.
Yep. My character... You want to know? I played as all 3 of the characters. I never really played as Mario.
Yeah.
Because he's the baseline for everyone, which means he wasn't really good at anything.
I'm just like, And, you know, so we have some of the retro revival going on there. Sega put out Sonic the Hedgehog 4.
Yep.
Which
went over pretty well.
Although I've had some issues with how Sega is implementing that game.
Didn't you have a problem with the physics of the game?
No.
Your movement?
Nope.
Okay.
My beef with them is that they were putting out this game in episodic format, but with the caveat that if, an episode didn't sell well, they're not gonna make the next one.
Yeah, there's kind of a... Well, here's the thing. I think most game companies are doing that. It's just that most of them haven't said it.
I think if you are going...
I think they were being more upfront about it than a lot of the companies.
I think if you're going to do a game in episodic format, you plan out the entire series. You do not, go, oh, well, we'll only do this if this sells. Because, you get a couple of episodes in and say, the sales aren't to your liking, then that's it. You've ended it on a cliffhanger.
I hate when that happens. I hate when it happens in TV, in video games, in books, anything like that. So trust me, I'm behind you. I'm just saying I don't know if that's as much something that Sega's doing against us as it is... This is what all of the companies doing episodic things are doing. It's just that Sega is the only one who actually came up front and told us. Because do you really think if there weren't enough sales and they were losing money that any of the companies would continue making episodes of their series? I think the answer is no. I just don't think that's happened yet.
And, they were quoted as saying that
Plus, it helps that it's a game that really, in comparison to, let's say, The Last of Us, Sonic 4 cost next to nothing to make.
Yeah.
So it's not hard for them to recoup their losses.
They said that if Episode 2 sells well, and Episode 3 will likely be developed, as well as a possible Episode 4, and then Sonic 5. So, right now there is no news about Episode 3, so I'm just kind of like, eh.
I'm just not sure how well Sega itself is doing right now.
It is true.
I think the issue isn't necessarily that Episode 2 didn't make enough money, as it is the money that they made was being used to try to stop them from hemorrhaging money. And I'm not sure if it was successful.
Well,
of course, this might be me speaking out my ass, because honestly, I haven't done a super amount of research into how Sega's doing right now. All I know is from a couple things, and it's not like I've looked into Sega the way I've looked into some of the companies we're talking about. Because they've kind of fallen off the radar for me. I am a Sonic fan, so I have played several of their newer games, but I know they traditionally have not been doing very well. So maybe I'm just attributing their current difficulties to that.
that is entirely possible. And while we're on the subject of, the platforming revival, I'll say one place that they're really in pretty good demand and doing well is the indie scene. It always comes back to the indie scene, because apparently that's the indie area, as well as the handheld market, but I think more so the indie area, the indie scene, are where games go to be experimental.
They do so many, not necessarily platformers. I heard about 2 games in the last couple days where I'm like, I need to frickin' play that. It's a game where you actually can hack the source code of the game in the game. Your character's sword is a USB thing that they hook into the enemies, and you can change their actual stats in the code of the game. And as you get further along, you get books and stuff that let you rewrite certain parts of the code. And you're actually it's not just changing; you actually are rewriting the code of the game. When you do a save, when you go back to an older save, you are rolling the application back. And I'm like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. That could only be done as an indie.
Sign me up. Where do I?
Then there was another one called DLC Quest, which is making fun of downloadable content, the name of the show. Where when you start the game, you can't jump, you have no animation, and you can't move to the left. And you have to walk across several coins and buy the ability to move to the left and jump. Everything in the game is downloadable content, but you don't pay for it with your wallet. You have to get coins in game. It's all a parody of the downloadable content method of making a game. Where there's nothing that isn't downloadable content. And I'm like, so it's a total parody.
Cool.
Both of those are ones I'm going to eventually recommend to you. They aren't super involved with platforming. I think both of them do have some platforming in them. But I thought those would be... Those are examples of how the indie scene really tries to do different things, try new things, because that's what when you go to the indie marketplace, you're not looking for more of the same that you've always found. You're looking for new things or things you haven't seen in years. So there's a lot of retro stuff because this is where people are making them, but then there's so much experimental stuff too. And both of those have melded together in some of these platformers like Battle Block Theater, which I know you're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. That is one of the most hilarious platforming games I have ever played. Battle Block Theater, which is made by the Behemoth. I've mentioned them on downloadable content before. They've made Castle Crashers and Alien Hominid, and they are now working on, as yet, the untitled Game 4.
When you first showed me Battle Block Theater, Brian, I don't know what the expression on my face was, but the way you were looking at me, I must have had, what the hell is this?
Battle Block Theater is so funny, and
it's hilarious.
It's a pretty difficult platforming game. There's a good reason why they give you infinite number of lives, because you will need every one of them. to get through this game, but it is funny. The story is hilarious. It's one of the few platforming games that actually has a plot. And
it does good now. Battle Block Theater to me is a great melding of the old and the new. And it's the kind of thing where, honestly, I think Battle Block Theater could have done well as an actual, like, as a core release on a system, rather than just a downloadable game. Which, there's a stigma with a lot of gamers to downloadable games. And justified or not. And that's one of the ones where I'm like, this could totally have just been a regular game. Like, it's that good.
It is that good. I mean, I also don't know if the behemoth has the finances to pull
I'm not saying they should have done it that way. I'm just saying, looking at the game, how clean it is, how just everything about it, I think it could have done well.
I think you're probably right. And Battle Block Theater came out on Xbox Live, so you can get it. It is also coming out on May 15th. So be sure to get it. It's going to come out May 15th on Steam. So for those of you who do not have Xbox Live, you can get it on Steam.
I will be picking it up.
Yeah, please do. You'll thank me.
You already let me play like one of the last levels while I was at your house. It's totally worth my time. I do not have Xbox Live. My Xbox is not hooked up to the internet. Yes, I'm a blasphemer. But I will definitely be picking this up on Steam as soon as I have the option.
Good. Excellent. You will absolutely love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful game. Another game that I played, which melds the platform genre with puzzle solving, that would be Portal.
Oh, Portal. Portal has... Do we really need to heap any more praise on Portal? Because I'm pretty sure we said Portal and everyone here knows exactly what we're talking about. It's not that it's not deserved. It totally deserves every bit of it.
Here's the fun part. I am not a fan of puzzle games. I played Portal 2 before I played the first Portal, and I couldn't stop playing. I was gripped. I wanted GLaDOS to keep making fun of me, so I just kept going. It was just a...
Here's the thing that I'll say about Portal. Portal has this miraculous way of bringing gamers together in that I hate first-person shooter games, which is a lot of how Portal's built. But I love it.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what kind of game, no matter what, you like sports games. If they put you in front of Portal, you're going to enjoy yourself. If you like RPGs, they put you in front of Portal, you're going to enjoy yourself. Because it is fun at that basic level. It's something that, it doesn't matter what kind of game you normally enjoy, you're going to find something to enjoy in Portal.
Mm-hmm.
I'll challenge you to find somebody who can't enjoy Portal. And of course, there's going to be somebody out there right now who's going, "Oh crap, I hate that game!" And you're completely right, you're welcome to your opinion. But in my experience, I can show Portal to anyone. I can show them to people, I can show them to older people, my parents' generation and older, which that's like 50s, 60s now, that can pick up Portal and have fun. No matter who you are, I think that game transcends a lot of the self-imposed limitations of what kind of games we tend to enjoy. That was a mouthful.
That was, but well said nonetheless. Another indie game I am currently playing on Steam is Gianna Sisters.
Oh, yes.
Gianna Sisters Twisted Dreams.
I recommended this game to you, so I'm very glad to hear that you're enjoying yourself.
I am loving this game. It's hard as hell.
In that good way.
Gianna Sisters Twisted Dreams. When I did some research on this game, I found out that this was like a spiritual sequel to...
Wait, let me go into this. I actually did a whole, 15-minute review I was going to put online about this, including its history.
Well, don't take up 15 minutes.
I'm not going to, but I'll do the little rundown.
Give us the Cliff's Notes.
Gianna Sister Twisted Dreams was originally made basically as a clone of Super Mario Brothers. That was where it originally came from. It was out for the Commodore 64, and the Amiga, and I think it came, and I'm pretty sure it came out on one or two other systems. Eventually, through lawsuits, they were no longer allowed to sell them in America, but they were still sold throughout Europe, and Giana Sisters is actually much better known in Europe than it is here. But years later, with the permission of Nintendo, they actually did a reimagining of Giana Sisters and started putting them out on the handheld systems.
Yeah, Giana Sisters DS.
Yep, Giana Sisters DS, and there was another one too. I can't remember the name of it without looking it up. But they did very well. Not like blockbuster, but they did well. They made more than what they needed to. So eventually they did a Kickstarter for Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams, which was basically a new start for the series. I backed the original Kickstarter, and I have never regretted it once. I think Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams is everything we need to have in platforming right now. It's fun, it's imaginative, it has a lot of that old difficulty level that we all grew up on, but in a way that doesn't feel unfair. It feels like when you die, you made that mistake, and you're going to go back and you're going to fix it. And with unlimited lives, if I remember correctly.
Yes, you do have the game keeps track of it.
Yes, with unlimited lives, you never feel like you have to stop, and you can keep trying the same parts to get through what you need to get through. And both of us have lost hundreds of lives going through this, but it is such a blast, and I hope even if one of the people listening to this goes out and picks up Giana Sisters because of it, I'll feel like we did a good thing, because I think this series needs to be heard about.
Just a clarification on your earlier point, there are only 3 Giana Sisters games. You had the original, which was the Great Giana Sisters on the Commodore 64.
Yep.
Then Giana Sisters DS, and then this one. So there have only been 3 in the...
I'm going to look that up, because I believe you. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I'm almost completely certain there was at least another one on the DS that was being made. Maybe it was never released.
Okay, well, while you look that up...
you can continue.
There's another platforming game that I have heard about, but I've never played, but I've heard very good things about it. I don't know if it's the correct pronunciation. Is it Trine? Trine? I have no idea how it's correctly pronounced, but it came out in 2009.
I have heard of the name. I can't talk too much because I've never played it and I know very little about it.
Well,
so
it is a game that is available on Windows, Linux, Mac, and PlayStation Network. The game takes place in a medieval fantasy setting and allows players to take control of 3 separate characters who can battle enemies and solve environmental puzzles. So that sounds very interesting. It is available on Steam, and it's another one of those platform/puzzle crossovers.
Okay. And okay, I think what I was thinking of was the iOS port of Giana Sisters DS, which they gave a different title to.
Ah, okay.
That's what I was thinking of, because I knew I hadn't played the one I was thinking of. So that would be why. I would have realized that if I'd looked into it much, but I don't have an iPhone or iPad, so when I saw that popping up in my thing, it just kind of went right by me.
Another game that I've been told I must play because I've been told I have to because of its sheer difficulty is Super Meat Boy.
Oh, Super Meat Boy.
Which I have never played, and judging from how hard people have told me this game is, I'm a little hesitant. I don't want to punch a hole through my computer monitor.
When we finish with Super Meat Boy, this will lead into my super hard game. Yes, Super Meat Boy kind of took the internet by storm, because
I remember.
It was everywhere, and it was super hard, but...
Team Meat had a booth at this year's PAX, so...
everybody was it was everywhere, because, the character and the visuals were so weirdly endearing, you know, considering it's a character made out of meat, but, like, just looking at it, like, it had this charm to it that I think is what attracted us to a lot of platformers throughout the years, and it has that in spades. I mean, it's as dumb as it sounds, it's the it factor, and you can't manufacture that, really. It's something that comes when you make a game you're passionate about. And I think there's no doubt that these people were passionate about their game.
And just incredibly, incredibly hard. Originally, there was supposed to... apparently, there was supposed to be... it was supposed to get a WiiWare release as well, but because of Nintendo's stupid policies, it got canceled. So...
well...
that'll happen. Thank you, Nintendo. Again.
Yep. It happens.
It does, yes.
Especially in this industry.
Alright, Ronnie, I know you had a couple.
Going from Super Meat Boy, let's go into I Want to Be the Guy. Now,
Although, lower your voice a bit, you are starting to sound garbled.
I'm sorry. For those listeners, I'm having issues with my microphone. We realized this before the podcast, but we didn't really have too much time to troubleshoot it. I will try to keep my excitement reined in. So, I Want to Be the Guy, which is the amazingly difficult game where if you play easy mode, your character starts with a pink bow in his hair, and you have saves in every stage. That's how I played the game, because you're going to die between 20 and 100 times in every level of this game. And by level, I mean screen. And by screen, I mean every couple inches. It is an incredibly hard, but incredibly fun game that takes a lot of patience to beat, but it is absolutely hilarious through the entire game, and if you like to see unexpected things happen, unexpected things are going to be happening to you throughout this entire game. It's going to make you have to think to get through a lot of the levels. It's not just, now, a lot of it is your reflexes, which if you came from the old 8-bit era, you might think you're okay. You would probably be wrong, but you might think you're okay. But you also have to think about it. There are dead ends in the game, which you have 2 ways to go, but you don't realize there's 2 ways. And you get to go. They keep you going for a couple screens before you reach the dead end. And you think there's a secret in that screen, or maybe the screen before. No, it's about 4 or 5 screens back that you have to figure out where you're going. And this happens throughout the game. You really have to think, you have to pay attention, you have to have a load of patience. But every time you get through one of those screens, you feel satisfied. And you will die in 1,000 different, very interesting ways. I'm going to get Brian to play this game someday. I promise you.
Okay.
It'll happen. It'll happen. Right after Abe's Odyssey.
But yes, I Want to Be the Guy, which is apparently the full title is I Want to Be the Guy, the Movie, the Game.
Yes, sir.
And it's apparently, the developer said that this was supposed to be a sardonic love letter to the halcyon days of early American video gaming, packaged as a nail-rippingly difficult platform adventure.
Yep, it is everything you loved and hated about the 90s. Or the 90s, the 80s.
Either
the
way.
90s, too. The 90s had some.
Yes, certainly. So, I feel that as we move into the final question, before we head into final thoughts, is that how, despite the overall decline and now, somewhat resurgence of platforming games, although maybe not amongst the big name guys, how are platforming games relevant today?
Was that for me, or are you going to go into it?
I'm asking you.
Oh, okay. How are they relevant today? Well, I think platformers, as we've already brought up, has had a recent resurgence. And I think a lot of how they're going to be relevant in the future is going to be how sticky this resurgence is. Is this just going to be a short retro revival where the games are going to fade away after a year or two? Or is this starting another rise of platformers? I hope it's going to be starting another rise of platformers, But at the very least, even if it doesn't, I think that this current rise in platformers is going to be leading to a very relevant rise in platformers in the indie scene, where those are not going to be disappearing. And at the very least, even if the rest of them start to fade away in the more expensive current set, we're always going to have Mario. That's not going away.
No, despite all the calls from people, saying that Nintendo should put Mario on PlayStation and Xbox, and I'm saying I think Nintendo would rather commit seppuku than see Mario on a Sony or Microsoft platform.
The other thing I think is, I think that we're never going to see a huge amount of games being sold in Walmart that are platformers. I think the number of ones on Xbox Live, on the PlayStation Network, on Steam, not even just indie ones, but ones that are being done, like Sonic 4, the episodes, I think those are going to rise up, without a doubt. Because platformers, it's hard to make a platformer that's going to have as big a splash as The Last of Us. Mario can do it to a point where they can come out and make it feel like it's a AAA title, but I think platformers can be done relatively cheaper and still be a very high quality, so I think that they're going to do very well in the downloadable market, both from indie developers and from bigger name developers.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, I think the days of platforming games as the games to play on the major home consoles, I think those days are now behind us. I think that
except for Mario.
Yes. And I do think that platformers are going to continue to have life, not just in the indie scene, but in the handheld. So I think you can get away with more experimentation in both those areas. And I think that, I mean, we've already discussed platforming games at length on handhelds and in the indie scene. So there is still life there. Big name companies might not want anything more to do with them because, they're for kids. But obviously that seems to be proven wrong with indie games and on handhelds. So
I think it's really hard to say that Super Meat Boy was meant for kids.
Not having played it, I still I'm going to agree with you.
I'm not saying that kids couldn't play it, don't get me wrong. But I think it's really hard to say that Super Meat Boy was made with them as the primary demographic. Yes. I'm pretty sure the primary demographic for that is the same primary demographic as I Want to Be the Guy, which is people in their late 20s, early 30s, maybe even later 30s, who grew up on the 80s consoles, who are used to a unrelenting level of difficulty with that level of satisfaction.
There you go. I like that answer. So, we're going to wind down here. We're going to head to our final part of the podcast, our final thoughts, to bring up anything we neglected to mention in the first half or at any other point during this episode. So, Ronnie, if you have any final thoughts...
Ooh, me! As I mentioned, actually, to Brian during the interim break, I actually had two games that I can't believe, or one series and one game, I can't believe I did not mention when we were back in the NES era.
Well, now's the time to mention them.
Now is the time. The first one is Gargoyle's Quest, which was an amazing series, one on the NES, one on the Game Boy, and one on the Super Nintendo, which had Firebrand, who you may have played in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. He actually made an appearance. Firebrand was originally from Gargoyle's Quest, which is a platforming game where you play as a gargoyle with wings. So hovering and flight, depending on which game you're playing, are major parts of it. And the entire game is designed with your flight in mind, creating a very, very different feel than most platformers. Gargoyle's Quest is probably one of the most interesting platformers to come out on the systems. I highly recommend it to anyone. I think that it had some of the best ideas that I wish I wish they'd done more with. Not that they'd done more with, but I wish it had been expanded by other games that never really did. Which leads into one of my favorite games of all time, a game that was a huge part of my childhood and part of what made me a gamer, and that is Little Nemo in Dreamland. Or Adventures in Slumberland, I believe it's called. But Little Nemo originally was a comic book from the turn of the century. It got an animated movie in the 80s, and this game is a part of the same franchise as the movie was. So it's one of the first licensed games. And it's amazing. It was done by Capcom. It has so many different ways of playing it, in that you play as this little boy who's in a world of dreams. So every level is a very creative dreamland. You're in a forest with giant animals, giant mushrooms. You're in a house of toys in one of the levels. Every level is very unique. Now, there are enemies in these levels, but there are also friendly animals that if you feed them, you can ride on their backs. And every one of them gives you a different way of playing the game. You have the fish that lets you swim underwater, and the frog that does as well, that you can use to jump on enemies like Mario. You have the bee that lets you actually fly, but only for short periods of time. The entire game is built around these, allowing you to use the different ones throughout the different levels. It's a very, very difficult game. Not Ninja Gaiden level of difficult, but it was a very frustrating game when I was younger, but there was so much going on, and it was so good that I never felt like I wanted to quit playing. I always felt like I wanted to get a little bit farther. I would say Little Nemo in Dreamland is one of the most to me my most classic NES game. And to everybody out there who's never heard of it, I highly recommend going out and checking out the game. It's just a marvelous game, and it deserves as much attention as I can bring to it.
Well, there you go. There you go. You've gotten that out of your system now. You're good.
I think so. I think I can go at least another day before I talk about Little Nemo.
Okay, excellent. That's all I want to know. That's great. That's absolutely great. So,
how about you? Any last thoughts? Any last thoughts, Brian? Host of this.
Any final thoughts? I'm looking through just some of the lists of platforming games that I remember playing, and
let me interrupt you for one moment. The title of that game was Little Nemo: The Dream Master. Adventures in Slumberland was the movie. I apologize.
There was one platforming game that I remember. I've tried to bury it, but it keeps coming back. It came out for the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. It's called Bubsy.
Yep.
Claws Encounters of the Furred Kind.
I played Bubsy.
It's had so much hype. It was supposed to be, the next Mario or the next Sonic, and womp womp.
I don't think it was as bad as people make it out to be. I enjoyed Bubsy, and people are probably going to hate on me for saying that, but I enjoyed Bubsy. It wasn't the most amazing game ever, but it was enjoyable. The first one.
I never made it past the first one, so...
Yeah. It wasn't the most... Like I said, it wasn't the most amazing game ever, but it's one that gets a lot of hate nowadays as being everything that was wrong with the 90s in video games. And I'm not really sure if it's earned that much hatred. I could be wrong.
Well, I think it got a lot of flack because of just how much hype was going into this game. And it was just kind of like, oh, really?
So this episode's really just been a love letter to platformers.
Yes. And why not?
And how much that love letter at the very top it is, we love you platformers, please come back.
Yes.
So
I mean, there are definitely some good ones out there. I mean, even a couple of the big name titles, like Uncharted. Uncharted is considered a platforming game, which people told me that I must play, and I have I have way too many games that I need to start now that my semester is over, so...
I'm looking at my Steam library right now, and there are more games on it that I haven't played than I have played.
Well,
so
yeah.
I've got a lot of things to go through that I need to play badly, such as Braid and Bastion. And...
Considering that Transistor is about to come out, yeah.
And Broken Age,
Oh.
which I actually one of the backers for that on Kickstarter. I still haven't actually played it since I got it.
Well, no
I
biscuit
should
for
get
you.
on that. I should get on that.
You should. Alrighty, I think we're going to call this episode done. So once again, if you have any questions, thoughts, comments about this episode or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can get a hold of us in a variety of ways. On Facebook.com/DLContent, at Twitter @DLContent, Tumblr, dlcpodcast.tumblr.com, and as always, all episodes are available on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher, so let us know what you think.
And soon they'll be sold by a homeless person in your town.
Except that all these episodes are free.
That's fine. Then we'll be hiring them to give out free CDs.
Okay, so what are you trying? Is this the AOL 3.0 plan of business? Just put discs everywhere?
It worked for them.
For a while.
I don't know. They make great coasters.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, it remains for me to thank Ronny, and Ronny for being on this episode.
Woo! Glad to be here.
And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.